Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jacob Restituto, and I'm a musician from Northport, New York. And today we have a very special guest here on the channel. We have Whitney Phillips, and we're going to be talking about everything in this interview, from her story starting as a waitress to going from writing with Justin Bieber and Ariana Grande, being a songwriter, being a producer, and everything in between. So stick around; it's going to be really cool. But before we get into this interview, I actually wanted to talk about mentorship that she's doing, and I wanted her to have the opportunity to share what she's doing and the opportunity that she has before we get into this interview, so that if you're interested, you can listen to this interview with that frame of mind. So, Whitney, without further ado, if you could just share a little about this mentorship that you're offering, and we'll get right into this interview.
Yes, I'm so excited about this mentorship. It's something I've been thinking about for a while. I did a lot of mentorship about 2 years ago through She Is the Music. Really enjoyed it. It was one of the most rewarding experiences for me and the girls that I was mentoring. It's about once a week that I get, maybe more, that I get a DM from somebody asking me to give them advice on how to get into the industry or to listen to their music and critique them. And so I wanted to create a more structured, focused way of being able to give back to aspiring songwriters. So I'm creating this program, and I'll be sending out information for it in the next few weeks. And so right now I'm getting a mailing list of people that are interested. There's going to be different levels to the mentorship based on how much involvement you want with me and what you're looking for. But I will cover everything from, essentially a 101 of getting into the industry and songwriting. Everything from creating a great concept for your song to financially supporting yourself in Los Angeles while you hustle your first publishing deal. So I'm going to cover the bases with this mentorship, and I'm really excited to get started and to get people involved in it.
Absolutely. So you said before we filmed this that the best way to contact you is through either DM or your email, and I'll put that information on the screen and down below, so if people want to reach out, they can.
Yep.
And definitely keep me posted on how this goes. I'm really excited for you. So let's get right into this interview. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jacob Restituto, and I'm a musician from Northport, New York. And today we have the absolute pleasure of having Whitney Phillips here on the channel. Whitney, thank you so much for taking the time out of your crazy schedule to come on and chat with us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We've been chatting back and forth trying to get something booked for a bit, so I'm glad we were able to set down and get it worked out.
Me too.
So people may not necessarily be familiar with you in your work and what you've done, but you've worked on quite a handful of songs, and from quite a bit of artists that have we've probably all heard their names or heard the songs that you've actually worked on. So can you go and give a little bit of backstory on your journey in the musical industry, but not necessarily starting from there? I'd actually love it if we could start from the beginning or earlier in your career, earlier in your, just the journey. Like, it's easy to be like, oh, well, you did all these things, which is great, but like, how did we get there is really the question.
God, I mean, the beginning, I was a waitress in LA. That was really like the beginning for me.
That's the
I mean,
classic story.
it is. It's a coyote ugly story. I left. So I'm from Seattle, born and raised. Left when I was like 17 and a half. The second I could just get out of high school, I went down to college to LA, and started interning at the record label and started like building out my network a little bit. But I was a waitress. I left school. I started waiting tables. I started performing. I thought I wanted to be a singer at the time. I was wrong. I started performing everywhere around LA.
Can I interrupt you actually really quick about that? So I read that in one of your bios somewhere that you started as an artist and then you shifted your career. So I was, and that sparked a question in me. I was curious, what was that spark or whatever the case in you that was like, you know what, actually I don't want to do this, or the realization that you wanted to switch to something else? Because I'm curious about that.
God, yeah. Performing was always something that I dreaded. I hated it. Like, and I didn't know exactly what was coming up inside of me when I went to perform. I would get so nervous and I wouldn't really know why, because I never really had trouble speaking in front of people. I didn't feel nervous in the studio. So I was like, why do it never felt natural to me to perform. And I realized that's because I don't think I was born to be an artist. I don't think I was born to be a performer. And it was soon after getting my first publishing deal that I was like, you know what, like what I really love about this is just writing the stories behind these
Sure.
songs, and I'll leave it to the artists to do their thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I think is great, like introspection. I think that some people can be a little, I don't know what the word is, like stubborn or cocky or whatever the case is, and it's like I'm gonna make this work, and it's like, but you could be so
Yeah.
much happier if you just pivoted and did something else, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like I think that I was like fighting against the stream a little bit of my life to like have that moment of surrender. I think to me, initially, I was like, I'm not going to be defeated. So I like
Sure,
kind of misunderstood that this natural pivot that just was always meant to
sure.
be was not a defeat. It was more like a redirection to what I was always meant to do.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So, yeah, I think that a lot of people might be able to relate to that because it's just, there's a lot of opportunity within the music industry. And sometimes, it's interesting. That story, actually, I was speaking to somebody who is a very, very successful mastering engineer in the music industry and worked on tons of hits and stuff. But he originally started out wanting to be a musician and he realized, I don't think this is for me. And then he pivoted and now has this very flourishing career, and it's just interesting that slight pivot, and he's still in the industry. It's just not necessarily what he originally set out to do, and
Yeah.
maybe was never meant to do.
Totally. Yeah, I think it's important for your life to just take your ego out of what is happening in your life. And
Oh
I
yeah,
mean,
for
I
sure.
remember I was a waitress at the time, and I had this very poignant conversation with God. I was like 21 years old, and I'm just like laying in my bed, and I remember just kind of like praying or kind of just saying to the universe or whatever, I'm like, listen, like, what am I supposed to do with my life? Like, I'm trying so hard to be an artist. It's not coming naturally. I was like, God, if you want me to be a truck driver and that's what I'm called to do in this life to be happy, I'll do it. Just put me on the right track. And it
I
was
love
this
that.
moment. Yeah, it was this moment of surrender of like, fuck, like I'm not in charge. Like, let's see what else there is for me. And then about 2 weeks later, I met my first songwriting partner. And I was just in it from that moment on and shoot to, almost like 15 years later, my second publishing deal. And it always felt very easy for me.
Yeah, so let's pick it up right from there. You mentioned getting your first publishing deal and then realizing this is really what you want to do. So and that's a perfect segue from what you were just talking about, like, meeting your first co-writer or songwriting partner. Let's talk about that. Can you expand on that a little? Because I think that it seems so, if it can seem so magically easy sometimes. It's like, oh, I just met this person and we wrote a song and my life is perfect. Not perfect, you know what I'm saying, though. Like, it's like it just all fell into pieces, but it's like obviously it was not like that. There's so many caveats to the story, and that's what I think people miss, and that's why it's like the Instagram of life. It's like, oh, she just met somebody and now she's writing for Justin Bieber, and it's like, yeah, but
Yeah.
there's so many, exactly. But so I'd love to hear the caveats, the nuances of the details of how that actually came about.
Yeah, so I met my first songwriting partner. I was still waiting tables. Nothing came easy. I mean, that was just the beginning. That was like those years were they were so, God, we were really in the trenches. Like we really got it out the mud those years. We were a group. Our name was Paper Cuts. It was with a Z. So I'll just leave that there for you. But it was very like popular to have like a name for your songwriting team.
Sure,
There was,
sure.
I mean, the Matrix, the Click, like there was group names swirling around. So we thought that was really cool. And it was me and my friend Kevin, and we were like not good. We showed some promise, but what we really showed was like tenacity. Like we just wanted it so bad. And like 5, 6 days a week, we would just be at my house working in my studio. I lived there with my boyfriend. God bless him. He would just hear us blasting music all the time. And that was my life. I would go from like studio to waiting tables. And then eventually I think we got somebody interested in like managing us after like a couple years of doing that and just networking around the city. And that kind of led me to another writing team. Kevin kind of started doing his own thing with like acting, and I just kept pursuing songwriting. And then I got into another songwriting team or group with a Swedish producer and a writer from London who frequented LA a lot. And we ended up writing a song that got picked up by Lil Wayne. And I was waiting tables and I got a phone call that he had cut the song. And I was like, oh my God, like here we are. I did it. And that got me my first publishing deal with BMG. And then now I'm with Sony. So, but that, I mean, those years as paper cuts was like, that was 5 years in and of itself.
Hmm.
That was like 2 years, with this other team. So it was grind after grind.
Absolutely, and again, it's so easy to gloss over these because like it's there's some I don't know if you're familiar with the term confirmation bias, but it's essentially like, to my understanding of it, is like we see the final result, so it's so easy to be like, oh, all those things, yeah, they were worth it because we're here. But when you're in the middle of those things,
Yeah.
you don't see those things. For example, you just mentioned it was 5 years as paper cuts, right?
Mhm.
That's 5 Christmases that passed. That's 5 birthdays that passed. That's five, Mother's Days, Father. Like that's a lot of time that passed. It's how 1,500 days. Of time, and people just like when you're like, oh, and it's not necessarily really working. That's a long time.
Yeah, well, nobody was paying us, that's for sure. So I don't think it was
Exactly.
technically work. It was more just like a glorified hobby. But no, I mean, honestly, Jacob, like I did see the vision the whole time.
Absolutely.
And
A hundred percent.
that's the only way I was able to do that.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. See, I think, and that's what's I think the biggest difference between people that are necessarily meant for this career and to be completely frank, like it's like, because I don't know about you, but I get a lot of messages, people saying like, hey, I think I might be interested in being a musician,
Yeah.
and that's
No,
fine, but it's like, me telling you to go for it is not like I was gonna do it
really.
whether people say. I had like everybody I dropped out of college to do music full time, and
Yeah.
like for like 2 years my grandparents and my all these people would be like, so are you gonna go back to school? Like, no. Like,
Yeah.
so everybody was
The
telling me I was making
worst,
the wrong
right?
decision. Yeah.
Oh my God. Like, going home for the holidays was like I knew the scripts like the back of my hand. It was like, when you get in a real job, like it was frustrating. And
Absolutely.
I get it now. Like as a parent, I can see how my mom was like, we just put our daughter through college for 4 years, and now you're gonna say fuck that and go wait tables
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
gamble your whole life away. So they were like,
Sure.
what is the backup plan? But I
Yeah.
never had a backup plan. And
Exactly.
exactly, and call it stupid, call it whatever, but like it got me somewhere.
I completely agree. Absolutely. But that tenacity in that vision is what drives. But like, I think that the people need to have that realization. It's like, hey, it might not happen. It might very well happen in 3 weeks for you, but it most likely will not. And you have to be willing, I think, to have those extended periods of time where it's just a hobby, a glorified hobby.
Well, and I think also like now that I look back at that and just like my life as a whole, as I get older, I realize like because it's a gamble, to keep waiting tables when you're overqualified and you're getting
Sure.
older and actors do it every day. It's a huge gamble to play with your life like that and to sacrifice security and stability for what you really want. But it's a conversation you have with your own life and yourself that
Yeah.
says, why are you here? Are you here to be safe? Because you can do
Hmm.
it. You can totally do that. Or are you here to kind of call the bluff of your own life and really go for it? So you just have to be able to be courageous enough to have that conversation and be bold enough to stand in whatever that answer is.
Yeah. Absolutely. Come hell or high water, as they say, right?
Right. Yeah. Yes.
So continue along. I'd love to talk about your first publishing deal with BMI or BMG.
BMG.
BMG. Okay. So let's talk about that because I'm not sure that everybody watching this will always understand what that necessarily means. So can you elaborate a little bit more onto like what that looks like and what the details of like a publishing deal, or was it a one-off just because of the Lil Wayne thing, or was it like a contract where you were
Yeah.
hired by them? If you could, whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, it's fairly uncommon to get signed without a hit or a major or a song with a major artist like in the pipeline. So I was for sure getting signed off of the Lil Wayne song and the promise
Sure.
that it was, gonna do something. But also like BMG, I one of the people that I wrote the song with was signed to BMG, and so he kind of was in the ear of his publisher being like, "You should sign Whitney. She's amazing." I got acquainted with her. Lisa Cullington in actually the London office at BMG signed me. And then I ended up obviously getting close with the LA office, Andrew
Mm-hmm.
Gould. Um, and he, I was really nobody. It was my first, I mean, it was my first placement ever. And I felt very much like I fell like on the lap of the LA office. And they were like, okay, here's this girl that we just signed. Even though I was signed and I had a team, I very much still felt like I was on my own. And I
Sure.
was like, okay, I really have to prove myself. And that's like the theme of the music industry is you're constantly having to prove yourself no matter what, how much success you get. There's
Even
always
if you're up here, there's people that are climbing up that you've got to like, oh, I gotta keep, you know.
yeah, no doubt. So yeah, anyway, so I signed with BMG, but that's again like where the work began.
Mm.
But I had it in me, I had spent
Yeah.
years like hustling with that vision, so I was ready to go. And then within like a year or two, I started getting my own placements.
Mm.
Um, and then yeah, things kind of snowballed.
Define snowball. What does that look like?
Well, I mean, like my first year or two with BMG was, I think the first cut I got by myself was with Steve Aoki and God, who was the feature on it? Kid Ink. And so it was a song called Delirious, and that went to radio. Then after that, it was like Kylie Minogue, Celine Dion, Need to Breathe. I had a really active publisher who helped me quite a bit.
Mm.
Andrew Gould at the LA office was just, I think he saw how hard I was working and kind of, I don't know, matched my energy.
So let's talk about that process. What does that look like? So you go down to your studio and you're like, okay, I'm gonna write a song, which in itself is a beast sometimes. The song is written out, and then what happens? What do you do with that song after the fact? Like, how does it then get into the hands of Steve Aoki?
Yeah, well, that was my publisher. That was all my publisher. So he was kind of throwing me projects. I mean, the Steve Aoki song in particular, he sent me a track and he said that he just needed a chorus, a hook to the song, to the verses that Kid Ink had already done. And so I wrote like too many hooks, like 30 or 40 hooks that were all terrible except for one. And Aoki's manager ended up listening to them and handpicked Delirious out of the bunch. Um, Shocked that he listened to all of them, shocked that it was picked. But yeah, and so I think from there, my publisher was like, okay, if I send this girl a target, she'll hit it, or at
Mm-hmm.
least she'll try
Try,
her
yeah.
ass off to do it. So yeah, that was more things like that kept happening.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about then. First of all, the experience of hearing, your first couple tracks on the radio must have been pretty wild.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, listen, not enough. I could experience it way more times, but when I heard Delirious on the radio, I was like shook. It's like this is crazy.
Yeah, I bet. Absolutely. So, what does the process now look like of songwriting and pitching? Is it kind of the same for you, or as the years have progressed, has it shifted a little? What does the day to day look like now?
Now that I'm more like in the industry and have closer relationships with creatives, I think it's way more focused and targeted. And if I know that an artist is looking for a record, I know who to call of
Mm.
my friends to
Mm-hmm.
get the end result I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Before I had this middleman of a publisher, and that was kind of my conduit to all these projects. Now, like I'm way more self-contained. I have great relationships. I kind of know what to do. I just need somebody to tell me who I need a record for and what I need to do. And then I
Yeah,
can
absolutely.
curate, yeah, I can curate those sessions and pitch them out.
So it's interesting, like from where we are now, where you are now, and also just to where you originally first started from. It kind of the threading theme is the relationships, and how creating the first relationships with Kevin, your songwriter, partner, paper clips, to then everything that came
Paper
from that.
cut,
I'm sorry, paper cuts,
paper
which is
cut with the
yes,
Z
paper.
makeup. Let's
I'm sorry, you're right, because it's funny you say that actually, because
Paper
It's
clips is
actually
hard though. I mean, that's who knows.
no, no, it doesn't work. Paper cuts, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool because like you're cutting a track, and I'm like, that's
Yeah,
kind of cool. So,
we
and
thought it
then
was
and
the
then I
coolest thing ever.
and then I thought of it after the fact, and I thought of paper clips. I'm like, wait, why did I think cutting a track if it's paper clips? So I got all screwed up in my brain. I apologize about that.
No, it's all good.
Continuing along with your relationships and creating a relationship with BMG, and then start expanding that, and then now Sony, and now you have all these relationships now where it's like you can just reach out on your own and say, I heard that so and so is looking for a record. Let me reach out to person X because I know that they're in contact with that, and I can hopefully have a placement on that. And it's just interesting, as 15, 20 years that you said you've been in this is all developing these relationships, and that's really what fuels the fire.
Yeah, I mean, relationships are I think the crux of any industry. I mean, that's no matter what you do for a living. Um, but it's pretty small. Like when you get to a certain level of the music business, it is a little bit, the community of active working writers that
Mm,
are prolific and turning out records frequently are, it's not that massive.
yeah,
So you have
absolutely.
to, yeah, so you have to earn credibility for yourself.
So one thing that we were talking about before we actually hit the record button is the fact that you just made a move from LA to Nashville. And I'm curious because LA and Nashville have very different genres of music, that focus essentially. And I'm curious, like looking at some of your discography and your previous discography, it's been heavily focused on the pop area, pop EDM, like area. So I'm curious the move to you mentioned you going back and forth, of course, but you officially moved all your stuff, as you said, so you're not into Nashville. So,
Red plans.
yeah,
Red
exactly.
plans
So
with
that
the
being
red
said,
pictures, yeah.
exactly. So that being said, like I'm curious. I'd love to hear a little bit behind your thought process on that move to Nashville and what that looks like for the future plans.
I had been in LA for a really long time. I Nashville was I had been looking to leave LA for a minute after the pandemic and taking a step back and examining where I was kind of at just in my life and my career. I wanted more, and I
Mm.
wanted, I don't know, I craved a different scene, I craved a different energy. And so for the last like 2 years, I've kind of just been a little nomadic, just kind of like where would I go? What would like I know I still want to write songs, but what city can really allow me to still do that while moving the needle ahead for my own life?
Why not New York?
No, I mean New York, I love. No, no.
Hey, 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 hey! Be careful
Hey,
what
no,
you're
no,
about
no,
to
no, no,
say.
no, no. I like, listen, I feel like I would thrive in New York. Like personality wise, I think I belong in New York. I don't know if my career would, I don't know if I would be able to write as often as I could in Nashville or
I
LA.
very much actually agree. I think New York's a very different animal with the music industry.
Yeah. I mean, my publisher's there, she's Cleo Massey, like she's between LA and New York. And no, I mean, I love New York, and I wish it had more of a pop scene because I feel like I would
Yeah.
live. But yeah, no, Nashville was like even parts work and personal life. I just kind of wanted a switch up for myself. And it's really cool what's happening here. There's a lot of
Hmm.
people from LA coming here.
Mm.
I have a creative community here. I write great songs when I'm here. So it's felt oddly very natural to come here.
Yeah, it's interesting also too, was just talking about like the genres that we were just mentioning, how like New York's not like a super like heavy pop genre like city, but it's interesting to see that like you think Nashville, you think country obviously, right? But like country 30 years ago is very different than country now, and it's kind of blended the genres of country and pop. So it's interesting that you kind of mentioning that like a lot of LA people are moving over to Nashville, so it's almost like the natural progression of like this kind of integration of pop into country.
Yeah, I mean, this week alone we have Beyonce and Lana putting out country albums. But I didn't come here to be like, hey y'all, like I'm here to write country with you. Like I'm not that presumptuous to think I'm gonna just like all of a sudden be getting all these country hits. I'm really
Mm,
still me. Like I'm still the
yeah.
writer person that I am, having a new experience and um kind of getting in where I can fit in as far like musically. I
Yeah.
actually really enjoy writing country, but if what I have to offer doesn't make sense for the session I'm in, like I try to be aware of that. Like I if I'm writing country, I'm writing country. And if I'm writing pop, I'm writing pop. And I don't want to like force it, if that makes sense.
Sure, absolutely. So let's talk about that writing process. What does that look like for you? What you sit down for a session and you're like, okay, cool, I got a blank sheet of paper. The most exciting and most intimidating part of the creative process is that,
I love it. No,
you
not
know,
intimidating. It's exciting.
sometimes I don't know, man. I've written, quite a bit of songs in my life, and sometimes I'm like, oh, here we are again. you
Yeah.
know?
Like, what do you mean? Like you dread it, or you just feel like it's a big mountain to climb, like when you go to write?
I think that actually I'd be really curious on your perspective on this. So like I've released I think like 135 songs. Like I'm not like a newbie at this, right? But there are times where I'm like, man, I hate this songwriting process just because it's like I'm so critical, I guess, of it, like the way I think of it. Of course, I've heard the cliches of like oh, your left side of your brain's getting in front of your right side of the brain. You know what I mean? It's like, and you're being too analytical in the songwriting process, which is something I'm working on as just like essentially free write a little more, as opposed to just like, oh, that word doesn't work there, so let me just focus on that one word, and then you wrote two lines instead of the whole idea you were going for. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that's kind of sometimes my crux.
Yeah. That it can be like a little confusing or
No, a little bit daunting because I think I'm overcritical of it.
yeah.
So then I'm like, oh, how am I gonna, figure this out,
Yeah.
or it's just not where I want it to be.
I understand. It's that's the dance that we do as creators.
Exactly, and that's why I feel like, to me at least, it could be a little intimidating. It's like, oh, here we go again, that battle of I love it, then I hate it, then I love it again.
I feel like the more I totally get that. And I think that there's less days like that for me now, but
That's encouraging.
yeah, I used to get them all the time for a variety of different reasons that
Mm,
really, when I look back, had nothing to do with how talented I was, which is
mm,
ironic because pitching songs, the art of pitching songs is like shooting darts in the dark. You are literally trying to catch a moving target of like what an artist wants and what will be a pitchable and cuttable song. It's a very impossible job to do, but people do it all the time. When you are doing something like that, the only thing that really aids you is some direction and focus. And I
mm,
think when you're not in the room with the right people, when you're not sure like who you're writing for or what you're writing about, who's singing this, when you don't have a point of view of who's even delivering this song, it's like
mm-hmm,
there's so many questions and there's so many elements that can make songwriting feel so much more daunting than it actually is.
mm-hmm.
However, like when it feels like that, like if I really am in a session where I feel like I'm lost out to sea, which isn't super often, but it still happens. The one thing that I have is myself, like me as an artist. And I start writing from making the imaginary Whitney Phillips album. You know what I mean? And I can do that because I know myself now
Sure.
and I
Yeah.
trust myself. But when I was, young, like in paper cuts, like I didn't even know how to form sentences. Like I was growing as a human being. I was like
Sure.
drunk and waiting tables. It's like, what the fuck did I have to say? Like with
Yeah.
any, eloquence at all.
No, absolutely. So I'd be curious now, from your perspective, who is writing great songs today? In your perspective, what artists or songwriters or ghostwriters are writing great hits or songs, not necessarily even hits, songs.
Are ghostwriters writing hit songs? I don't know. Are they? I feel like that's the big
I
discussion
don't know.
what AI is doing.
Wait,
Uh,
wait,
what do you mean by
wait. Hold on.
that?
How did AI get involved in this?
His ghostwriter, he like did the whole like Drake song and he went
No,
by
I'm not.
there and it was
Oh
an
no,
AI
I'm not.
generated song.
No, I didn't know actually. No, I'm sorry. I mean, ghostwriting is a phrase just of like, behind the scenes writers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. No, I didn't mean the AI generated. That's a
I
totally
wasn't sure
different
what you were
conversation.
talking about.
No, no,
Okay.
no. Like behind the scenes writers. Between like my question was, who's writing great music in your perspective today?
Artist or songwriter?
That's what I was trying to say before. I said originally artist, but then I was like, well, we're also like talking about like, songwriters here too. So that's when I said like, generalized songwriters and ghostwriters, and then we got into the topic of AI. So
Yeah.
in general, people who's writing something great.
Who's writing good songs these days? I mean, not to be generic, but Taylor, I think is, artist wise, like we love like an over personalized lyric that somehow feels relatable. I think she's a genius at doing that. I think her and Lana are nailing that. As far
Hmm.
as like people writing songs, I mean, I immediately just think of my own community.
Mm.
The best artists I know are my songwriter friends. I mean, they're more intimidating to be in the room with sometimes than these uber famous artists because I'm just like, you're about to witness something incredible. They impress me every day. And there's too many to name. There's too
Sure,
many.
of course,
Everybody
absolutely.
is really special in their own
Sure,
right.
sure. You mentioned Taylor in there, and then you mentioned Lana Del Rey, and I'm curious your perspective. Actually, it's the second time you mentioned Lana because coming out with a country album. You mentioned
Yeah.
you talk the music industry, and Lana Del Rey gets an incredible, rightfully so, a lot of chops. Like people like she's great, but I don't feel like she gets that necessarily as much in the public eye. And I'm curious your perspective on that. Like, why obviously is Taylor significantly more recognized in the public eye than say somebody like Lana, where like a lot of musicians and artists and songwriters will like drool over Lana's music.
Well, Lana just went to the Super Bowl, so let's see what happens. She might step into a whole different floor. I no, I think with them, like Lana, I would argue probably even would have equal, if not more, credibility as a songwriter than Taylor. I think they're definitely on the same level. I
Sure.
think as far as like why the public doesn't gravitate, I don't know that they don't. I think that a lot of people really love Lana, but I think it's kind of her choice. I think she's chosen
Mm,
to be a more private
very
personality
interesting.
and artist, whereas Taylor is very much, um, she does a
In the
lot more
public eye.
views. Yeah, she's in the public eye and just has an appeal about her that I think is more accessible. Whereas Lana's brand is a little bit more introverted and quiet. She doesn't want to go up on stage. She wants to, just make a good visual to her song and work at the Waffle House or wherever she's working. I think it's kind of like she does these obscure things because she just wants to be a different type of artist
Yeah,
with a different type of life.
absolutely. That's a great answer. Absolutely. Very interesting. So I don't know if I asked this yet or we kind of got sidetracked yet, but what would you say is a good song? What makes a good song for you personally?
I mean, some of my favorite songs are like not thoughtful, not meaningful lyrics.
Yeah.
It locks in a feeling that I can just
Mm,
experience an emotion.
well, that's what music is as a whole, right? An experience of an emotion. And then that gets locked into our brain somehow. So when you hear it 10 years later, it brings you back in a nostalgic feeling. It's a very strange psychological experience.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't really, yeah. What makes a good song? I mean, most songwriters will tell you four chords and the truth. That's true.
Okay, let's rephrase this question then.
Okay.
When you hear a song, because we hear music all the time, right? Especially working in this industry, like, what's something that makes you say, "Wow, that was cool"?
What, like a very sharp, creative lyric, I always appreciate where I'm like, oh, that's crazy. Like the way that they said that or the way that they were able to flip that lyrically. You can just tell when there's like I don't know, almost like a sense of humor around a lyric or the emotional IQ of a lyric is appealing to me. I'm like, that's amazing.
Hmm.
But it can be, just incredible production or
Sure.
even the arrangement of a song where it like trips up the natural or the traditional structure of a pop song, but it still
Hmm.
flows effortlessly. It's
Yeah.
like, I see what you did there. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Those are
Absolutely.
things that like I feel like songwriters appreciate.
Sure.
The public,
Absolutely.
like, they're just driving home from work. They just want to hear some like mumble raps.
Yeah.
And me too.
Touche. Touche. Yeah.
I just want to
Absolutely.
hear a mumble rap song like all the time.
One thing I want to ask about songwriting is you mentioned like these artists that have great emotional IQs and made me think of some of my great favorite favorite songwriters of history, and I'm curious, in your perspective, who are some of your songwriters that you look up to through history of, like, oh, whoever, maybe like the Bob Dylans or Princes or blah 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 blah, right? Like, who are some great artists that you look up to, or songwriters that you look up to?
God, I mean, I think when I first started songwriting, my queen was Mariah Carey. Like I loved her songs, her Butterfly album. I mean, I'm just revealing myself as the Pop Tart that I am. But I just thought her writing was so, I mean, I've always been like an R&B hip hop girl. I've always been drawn to it. So I liked her hybrid of pop and R&B. But that Butterfly album, she would just, her lyrics like on the roof and even butterfly and breakdown. I'm like, this is so eloquent and so
Mm,
personal, but I'm still enjoying, like, it's very smart, but I'm still enjoying the music and I'm relating. And I feel like I know this woman. She's talking to me about her life, and I feel like we're like having a conversation, which I think is what Taylor does really well, and why
mm-hmm.
she has a flock of, she has such a huge following because she has this accessibility to her. So Oh, yeah. I mean, I stan Mariah. That's my queen, but there's so many good songwriters.
Of
Like
course.
that question is so daunting to me that I can't even answer it.
I guess a more simplified question is, who are some songwriters, if they were period. So, for example, I'll preface this with a little bit of story into my life. There are periods in my life where certain songwriters, certain artists make tremendous imprints on my life. Where it's
Yeah.
like, a 6 month period or a 5 year period, whatever the case might be. There are certain periods in my life where it's like, this is Jacob Restituto's The Fray era. This is
Yeah.
my, Ed Sheeran era, with his Plus album was a huge influence. This is the 1975 era, like, where it's like they were just made such an impact on my life in that period, and they stick with me, and those albums stick with me. This is my what's it called? What's the group called? I'm drawing up, like, not All American Rejects, but that pop punk.
Yeah.
Oh man, sing
Yeah.
JC Ray. Shoot, I'm drawing a blank. Whatever. Point being, though, like that pop punk era, 2009, 2010 era. It's like I had these eras, and I can go back and be like, that those songwriters influenced me. Going back on yours, you mentioned Mariah. So, like, outside of that, like, what are some eras of songwriters that really influenced, the Whitney Phillips of today?
Okay. So Mariah, she's up there. Outcast
Mm.
that was a huge era for me in high school. That's like around the time I started thinking I was cool, and like riding around town with boys and drinking and all that shit. But Outkast was just, I thought they were incredible. And also Incubus was
Mm.
huge. I grew up in Seattle, which was an interesting place to grow up. So I had like influences kind of all over the place, but predominantly like rock and grunge. So I like Nirvana and Soundgarden, like I would say that was like my first era because
Mm-hmm.
I had a brother an older brother that I just kind of was listening to what he was listening to. So he
Sure.
was blasting like Nirvana, Soundgarden, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and I'm like blasting Vision of Love by Mariah Carey from my bedroom. But yeah, grunge was my first, and then pop with Mariah and Whitney and Janet had a huge
Mm.
like TLC era. That was
All right.
amazing. Um, But no, to be honest, Mariah, Incubus, and Outkast like shaped me musically.
Very
I
interesting.
was like obsessed. Incubus is fucking incredible. Like I don't think they ever got the flowers that they deserved, but
Mm.
they were to me like, especially somebody that loved hip hop music. I felt like they were a hybrid of like rock um and hip hop, and I just always loved it.
For sure.
Yeah.
Very interesting. It's very interesting how all our unique experiences shape the creatives that we become.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to spend some time chatting about your career and the things that you have done. So I'd love to, if you can, my final question I'd like to ask everybody is, now that you are where you are in your career, now that you know what you know, what is one thing that you wish you knew when you first started?
Not everybody's going to like you. And sometimes it will be for absolutely no reason. You can't make everybody happy. So just always do you.
Mm.
And Yeah.
I think that's a great answer. There's no
Is
need
that
to
a good
overthink that
answer?
one. That's a
Like,
great. I mean, I don't even need to say if it's a good or answer. Like, it's an answer to you, and that's authentic to you. But I think it's a good answer. You know,
I think that, and I would also say get a down payment for a house as soon as possible. And
that's
buy a
very
condo in
fair.
LA as soon as possible. That's what I would tell.
Very, very fair advice, especially in the economy that we live in today.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time, Whitney. If you could hang up for 30 more seconds, I just want to say first, well, thank you for taking the time, but also thank you to every single person that watched this video. If you made it to the end, you're a true one. Definitely go check out all the stuff that Whitney is up to, all the songs that she's worked on, and supporting her in that way. Go check out all the stuff that she's continuing to work on. Best way to support this channel is checking out my own original music. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. God bless and peace out.